Let me get myself situated here. I always like to thank my teachers. So grateful thanks to Jesse Stommel, Sean Michael Morris, and Chris Friend at the Digital Pedagogy Lab, Charles Bailing and Roger Fisher at the Program on Intergroup Relations at the University of Michigan, Karen Ray Costa, Clea Mahoney, Judith Duttle, and Melissa Whaler from the Online Learning Toolkit, and Gabriel Rayleigh, Nikki Malley, Jennifer Foubert, Deirdre Doherty, and Mary Arman, who are my colleagues at Knox College. This is our agenda for the next 40 or so minutes. If you don't have a sheet of paper and a pen or pencil or an open window in which you can type something into a Google Doc or a Microsoft Word document, please get those things ready because we are going to do a little bit of reflection and free writing as we work through this agenda. So first, I'm going to do a little introduction about my first time as a teacher, which is some 27 years ago now. I'm going to talk about what a pedagogy of kindness is and also what it is not. I'm going to talk about justice, believing students, and believing in students. So here's our introduction. I am originally from England, and this map shows you where in England. I'm from Sheffield, which is in Yorkshire in the north of England. And if you're thinking that you can't really hear an accent, that is because I code switch and I speak whatever I hear spoken. So I change my accent to be understood. Between 1994 and 1996, I was a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I was in their history master's program, and as a first-generation student, I was a little bewildered by graduate school. I was a lot bewildered by the fact that I was completely new to the United States educational system. I was employed for those 2 years as a teaching assistant for the American Indian History Survey class. And that was where I realized that I wanted to teach college students potentially forever. However, on my first day, there was a lot of things going on in my mind. First of all, I was scared silly. Second of all, I had only graduated 1 month before I walked into the classroom as a teaching assistant. The British calendar is a little different from the United States calendar, and so I graduated in the middle of July. I was convinced that everybody was going to realize I was a giant imposter who knew nothing. I was supposed to know something about my subject. I was supposed to know more about it than the students. This seemed incredible to me. So the solution I came up with was to ask myself, okay, who would walk into this classroom and really own that space and know what they were talking about? And so I pretended to be Dana Scully for the entirety of the first semester that I was teaching. In my head, I would channel Dana Scully from the X-Files and thought that that really helped me. I was the definition of faking it until I made it. So I want to give you your first opportunity to free write for a little bit and to think back to a first day of teaching that you have had. How did you feel? If you haven't yet had a first day of teaching, think about what's ahead and what your hopes and fears are. I will keep time. Please take about 5 minutes to write. Okay, that's been about 5 minutes. You might be wondering why I asked you that particular question. Well, there are three main reasons. The first is that what happens when we begin to teach stays with us for a really long time. The second is that when we start to teach, we often emulate the previous teachers we've had. Not all of those teachers were kind to us. The third reason is because we usually have a lot to unlearn to become the teachers that we really want to be. Knowing who we are and where we've come from is a prerequisite for teaching with kindness. So what is a pedagogy of kindness? Well, it's easiest defined by what it's not. It's not about being nice. Nice is a band-aid that we tend to put over deep wounds in our educational systems. And nice will often tell you lies, whereas honesty is part of being kind. It is distinctly unkind to lie to someone. Nice also lies about things that happen in our educational system that are not nice, like precarity or power imbalances, or appeals to tradition and rigor that sometimes are a mask for other things. So here's what a pedagogy of kindness is. I would argue it's about justice, it's about believing students, and it's about believing in students. So let's take the first of those. How is this about justice? Well, here's some data to consider about the makeup of our undergraduate populations in the United States. 71% of undergraduate students fit a definition of non-traditional that is offered by Chris McDonald. They are at least 25 years old, go to school part-time, work full-time, are a veteran, have children, wait at least 1 year after high school before entering college, have a GED instead of a high school diploma, are a first-generation student, are enrolled in non-degree programs, or have re-entered a college program. And in your particular system, 49.1% of the students are over the age of 21. So by a particular definition of non-traditional, all of those are non-traditional students. 45% of undergraduates nationally are Black, Indigenous, or persons of color. That's up 15% since 2005, and likely a lot more since these figures were released. In your system, 64.2% of your students are BIPOC. 20% of undergraduate students nationally identify as LGBTQIA+. Now that figure is probably actually higher because of the pressures of coming out and some of the dangers that are involved for some students. Many will not actually report their identity. 60% of students at two-year colleges and 48% at four-year colleges have experienced housing insecurity. And 48% of students at two-year colleges and 41% at four-year colleges have experienced food insecurity. So what do these figures have to do with kindness? Well, the first is to ask us to question some of our assumptions. We might presume to know something about our students without evidence. Because we should be providing people with the benefit of the doubt, which costs us nothing, and because that behooves us to get rid of hoops, to believe in what and how much our students are saying to us. So take another moment to free write. Martina Spada, and this comes from Mariam Kaba, said no change for the good ever happens without it being imagined first, even if that change seems hopeless or impossible in the present. So I'd like you to ask you to imagine it. What could a pedagogy of kindness mean for you given these statistics that I just shared? Take 5 more minutes and I will keep time. That's been about 5 minutes. Thanks so much for thinking about this prompt. So let's dig into what it means to believe in students, or what it means when I say believe in students. I'm going to focus in this next section on assignments, on their design, on evaluation, and on grading as a way of making concrete the kind of ideas that I'm talking about. So there are a lot of common excuses that people give about assignments, and these are probably pretty familiar to you. Things like my printer broke, I was sick, someone died, or my laptop crashed. And what I suggest you should do in each of the instances that someone tells you these things is believe them. That's because this is about cultivating an atmosphere of trust in our classroom spaces, whether they are online or off. There is an obvious risk with this. Won't someone pull one over on me? And that's possible. But also possible is that we disbelieve students who are in genuine crisis. So what I'm asking us to do is change the way that we think about syllabi, assignments, activities, and homework with trust in mind, and communicating that trust to our students in all the things we do. That leads me to believing in students. So in 2017, I went to the Digital Pedagogy Lab, and in the track I was in, I was asked to think about who the student was that I imagined as my audience when I wrote my assignment sheet. I was asked what I communicated about who I was in the way I talked about my policies. And I was asked if my assignment was accessible to as many students as possible. I had to admit, the student that I imagined when I wrote my assignments was someone I did not trust to get it right. What I communicated about who I was when I wrote about my policies was that I was in a position of unassailable authority and I wasn't approachable. Was my assignment accessible? Not in the slightest. It was a wall of text. This was sort of mortifying for me to realize, but then I realized the solutions were in front of me. So here is what my assignment sheet looked like before. I'm a history professor, so this is a humanities example, but we can talk about other ways of thinking about this. Here's part one of the assignment. It's very formal. Formulate your own question about the history of birth control and reproduction in the United States. Identify your resources, do the research, and write an 8 to 10 page paper. You'll see that I give very clear specifics about what kind of secondary sources the students should use. And what these actually communicated to students was that I didn't trust them to get this right without me spelling it out. Now, I'm not suggesting that we take away all scaffolding from our students. They need clear guidance, but my guidance was a little too exacting. You can see this in the fact that this is only one part of 3 parts of the assignment sheet. I had a section that said, here's what I'll be looking for when I grade your papers. And it was very, very detailed. An introduction that thoughtfully sets the scene, a clearly identified thesis statement, strong organization, selection of sources, and so on and so on. Again, what I was communicating was my distrust in my students' ability to do what I was asking. And then finally, I would have a checklist at the end of the assignment sheet. This checklist was made really in reaction to having been burned by certain students before. And so I would reiterate that there must be a thesis statement and that there should be one idea per paragraph, everything down to keeping a copy of their paper for themselves. Here's what my assignment sheets look like now. Now, I'm not advocating that you copy this exactly and that you have these kinds of colorful icons or headers, but that you think about the way that your assignment sheets could be made more approachable. So I decided to make a cheerful header for this particular assignment sheet. I made an open-ended assignments that students helped to co-create. So what I asked was them to show me what they had learned, and I did not put further stipulations on that. I was interested in learning what they had learned, and I wasn't interested in this assignment in their writing. That was something we focused on elsewhere. I did have scaffolding. You can see here that there were dates, there was some guidance about how they should go about doing this, but nothing so formulaic as before. I included icons to help students who might find text difficult or daunting because of learning disabilities, for example. And I restated the due dates to make sure that no one was caught out. I also wrote in a font that was really easy for people to read. I did not use a lot of red or green in my assignment sheet so that anyone with a red-green color deficiency would not just see muddy grays. I linked to the Chicago Manual of Style, whereas before I had merely said they should use it. This was one less hoop for them to jump through to get to the end point that I wanted them to get to. And then I invited my students to collaborate with me on grading their assignments. So we would have a conversation as a class about how grades made them feel in general and what they thought about the grading systems that they encountered throughout their educational career. Together, we came up with a list of ways in which we felt people could earn each grade. And that grading system started with a C. So that instead of my students thinking that everyone got 100 points unless they screwed up, in which case they would get demerits, they understood that if they did the work, that was a basic expectation and would earn a C grade. And then they could exceed that and get a B or an A. We made these grading criteria for every single grade, right down to an F. When my students turned in their assignment, they also turned in a self-evaluation sheet. This asked them to evaluate how well they had done on the assignment. The first few questions on this sheet, as you can see, are very basic principles. Did you turn it in on time? Did you ask for an extension? These are all things that add up to them earning a C in the class. But then towards the end of this self-evaluation, I had more open-ended questions. Things like, in what way was this paper an act of exploring new intellectual territory for you? Or how could you improve before your next assignment? Is there anything else I should know in relation to you in this paper? Was a question I added to give students the opportunity to tell me about the context in which they were working. And that allowed me to respond more thoughtfully and compassionately to their situations. I would then have conversations with my students. Sometimes those conversations were one-on-one, whether that was in my office or on Zoom. And sometimes those conversations were conversations with the entire class, where we would talk about things that papers had in common, places where they could all strengthen, or maybe there was something that we could all rectify. So these changes in the way that I approached assignments and grading and design all expressed me believing in my students, their ability to have input in things like course policies and grading, their ability to co-create items like the syllabus and assignments, and their investment in the courses that they got to shape. So take another couple minutes just to free write. What is one thing you could do immediately to change your assignments to make them more welcoming and collaborative? Just take a couple minutes to jot down some rough ideas, and again, I will keep time. Okay, that's been a couple of minutes. Thanks for taking some time on that. In conclusion, I want to share this part of a poem that is by Naomi Shihab Nye. This is part of a longer work that is called Kindness. Before you know kindness is the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it until your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes everywhere with you, like a shadow or a friend. So, the 3 parts of a pedagogy of kindness are justice, believing students, and believing in students. And we have a few minutes left, and I'd be happy to take your questions. I also want to make you know that you can get hold of me on email, by Twitter, or see me at my blog, and I would be happy to field questions there too.
Thank you so much, Dr. Denial. And we are going to post the evaluation in the chat. And I hope people learned something. I love the self-reflection part, answering the question. So I truly appreciate you, and I hope our faculty got something out of this. So thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Excellent. Yeah, we're getting some positive comments. And Allegra posted the conference feedback form.
And I'm putting into the chat my email address just as a reminder in case anybody would like to email me, and my Twitter handle, which is @CJDenial on Twitter.
Yes, and I forgot to say that Allegra is a fan of your Twitter account. So, you know, if she finds it interesting, then yeah, I might rejoin Twitter just because of that. Thank you again. And thank you everyone for attending. We appreciate your participation. Okay. And I'll follow up with an email, Dr. Denial. I just like saying it. I know you said to call you Kate, but I like saying Dr. Denial.
Thank you. All right, I'll be in touch.
All right, bye. Thank you.
Bye.
I'm just giving everybody a minute to grab any links out of the chat that they would need. Keep in mind you will lose access to this chat as soon as you leave the meeting. So if you want to grab anything or open it, just give everyone a minute, and I will post the feedback link one more time. Thanks to everybody for joining us today and for your time and attention. I think that's all I have to say, Christina.
No, it's been a Monday, but it's all of these sessions and our speaker have made it a good Monday, an excellent Monday. So thank you. Thank you, Rebecca, for being our handler, and Allegra for everything you do, and everyone else for attending. I appreciate it. Allegra, can we post the evaluation link in the headquarters as well, just temporarily, or, you know, give people time to review it?
Sure.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.